Jason Treasure Island, start page 17. What used to be his seat with a drawn cutlass another gentleman. Come now, March, interrupted he, and I never heard a voice so cruel and cold and ugly as that blind man's. It cowed me more than the pain, and I began to obey him at once, walking straight in at the door and towards the parlor, where our sick old buccaneer was sitting dazed with alarm. The blind man clung close to me, holding me in one iron fist, and leaning almost more of his weight on me than I could carry led me straight up to him. And when I am in view, cry out, "Here's a friend for your beer. If you don't, I'll do this." And with that he gave me a twitch that I thought would have made me faint. Between this and that, I was so utterly terrified of the blind beggar that I forgot my terror of the captain, and as I opened the parlor door, cried out the words he had ordered in a trembling voice. The poor captain raised his eyes, and at one look the alarm went out of him, and left him staring. The expression of his face was not so much of terror as more of mortal sickness. He made a movement to rise, but I do not believe he had enough force left in his body. "Now, Bear, sit where you are," said the beggar. "If I can't see, I can hear. Finger steering business is business. Hold out your left hand, boy. Take his left hand by the wrist, and bring it near to my light." We both obeyed him to the letter, and I saw him pass something from the hollow of the hand that held his stick into the palm of the captain's, which closed upon him instantly. "And now that's done," said the blind man, and at the words he suddenly left hold of me, and with incredible accuracy and nimbleness skipped out of the parlor and into the road. Whereas I still stood motionless, I could hear his stick go tapping into the distance. It was some time before either I or the captain seemed to gather our senses, but at length, and about at the same moment, I released his wrist, which I was still holding, and he drew in his hand and looked sharply into the palm. "10 o'clock," he cried. 6 hours will do them yet," and he sprang to his feet. Even as he did so, he lifted, put his hand to his throat, stood swaying for a moment, and then with a peculiar sound fell from his whole height face foremost to the floor. And I ran to him at once, calling to my mother, but haste was all in vain. The captain had been struck dead by thundering apoplexy. It is a curious thing to understand, for I had certainly never liked the man, though of late I had begun to pity him, but as soon as I saw that he was dead, I burst into a flood of tears. It was the second death I had known, and the sorrow of the first was still fresh in my heart. I lost Chapter 4, The Sea Chest. I lost no time, of course, in telling my mother all that I knew, and perhaps should have told her long before, and we saw ourselves at once in a difficult and dangerous position. Some of the man's money, if he had any, was certainly due to us, but it was not likely that our captain's shipmates, above all the 2 spacemen seen by me, Black Dog and the blind beggar, would be inclined to give up their booty in payment of the dead man's debts. The captain's order to mount at once and light for Dr. Livesey would have left my mother alone and unprotected, which was not to be thought of. Indeed, it seemed impossible for either of us to remain much longer in the house. The fire, of course, in the kitchen grate, the very ticking of the clock filled us with alarms. The neighborhood, our ears seemed haunted by approaching footsteps, and what between the dead body of the captain on the parlor floor and the thought of that detestable blind beggar hovering near at hand, and ready to return, there were moments when, as the saying goes, I jumped in my skin for terror. Something must speedily be resolved upon, and it occurred to us at last to go forth together and seek help in the neighboring hamlet. No sooner said than done. Bareheaded as we were, we ran out at once in the gathering evening and the frosty fog. The hamlet lay not many hundred yards away thought out of view on the other side of the next cove, and what greatly encouraged me, it was in an opposite direction from that whence the blind man had made his appearance when the waiter, whether he had presumably returned. We were not many minutes on the road, thought we sometimes stopped to lay hold of each other and hearken. But there was no unusual sound, nothing but the low wash of the leper and the croaking of the inmates of the wood. It was already candlelight when we reached the hamlet, and I shall never forget how much I was cheered to see the yellow shine in doors and windows, but that as it proved. Start page 17, finish page 19.
Kelly, 2014, May 28th. Treasure Island, third page 20. Was the best of the help we were likely to get in that quarter, for you would have thought men would have been ashamed of themselves. No soul would consent to return with us to the Admiral Benbow. The more we told of our troubles, the more man, woman, and child they clung to the shelter of their houses. The name of Captain Flint, though it was strange to me, was well enough known to some there, and carried a great weight of terror. Some of the men who had been to field work on the first side of the Admiral Benbow remembered, besides, to have seen several strangers on the road, and taking them to be smugglers, to have bolted away. And one at least had seen a little logger in what we called Kit's Hole. For the matter, anyone who was a comrade of the captain's were enough to frighten them to death. And the short and the long of the matter was, that while we could get several who were willing enough to ride to Dr. Reliver's, which lay in another directions, that one would help us to defend the inn. They say cowardice is infectious, but then argument is, on the other hand, a great emboldener. And so, when we each had said his say, my mother made them a speech. She would not, she declared, lose money that belonged to her fatherless boy. If none of the rest of you dare, she said, Jim and I dare, that we will go the way we came, and small thanks to you, big, hawking, chicken-hearted man. We'll have that chest opened, if we die for it, and I'll thank you for that bag, Miss Cursley, to bring back our love for money. Of course, I said I would go with my mother, and of course they cried out at our foolhardiness. But even then not a man would go along with us. All they would do was to give me a loaded pistol, lest we were attacked, and to promise to have horses ready saddled, in case we were pursued on our return, while one lad was to ride forward to the doctors in search of armed assistance. My heart was beating finally when we two set forth in the cold night upon this dangerous venture. A full moon was beginning to rise and peered readily through the upper edges of the fog, and this increased our haste, for it was plain, before we came forth again, and the wood be as bright as day, and our departure exposed to the eyes of any watchers. We slipped along the hatches, noiselessly and swift, nor did we see or hear anything to increase our terrors, till, to our relief, the door of the Admiral Benbow had closed behind us. I slipped the bolt at once, and we stood and panted for a moment in the dark, alone in the house with the dead captain's body. Then my mother got a candle in the bowl, and, holding each other's hands, we advanced into the parlor. He lay as we had left him, on his back, with his eyes open and one arm stretched out. Draw down the blind, Jim, whispered my mother. They might come and watch outside. And now, said she, when I had done so, we have to get the key of that, and who's to touch it, I should like to know. And she gave a kind of sob as she said the words. I went down on my knees at once. On the floor close to his hand there was a little round of paper, blackened on the other side. I could not doubt then this was the black spot, and taking it up, I found written on the other side, in a very good, clear hand, this short message. You have till 10 tonight. He had till 10, mother, said I. Just as I said it, our old clock began striking. This sudden noise startled us shockingly, but the news was good, for it was only 6. Now, Jim, she said, that key. I felt in his pockets, one after another, a few small coins, a thimble, and some thread and pin needles, a piece of pigtail tobacco beaten away at the end, his scully with the crooked handle, a pocket compass, and a tinderbox were all that they contained, and I began to despair. Perhaps it's round his neck, suggested my mother. Overcoming a strong repugnance, I tore open his shirt at the neck, and there, sure enough, hanging to a bit of tarry string, which I cut with his own gully, we found the key. At this triumph, we were filled with hope and hurried upstairs without delay to the little room where he had slept so long, and where his box had stood since the day of his arrival. It was like any other Siemens chest on the outside. The initial B burned on the top of it with a hot iron, and the corners somewhat smashed and broken as by long, rough usage. "Give me the key," said my mother, and though the lock was very stiff, she had turned it and thrown back the lid in a twinkling. A strong smell of tobacco and tar rose from the interior, but nothing was to be seen on the top except a suit of very good clothes, carefully brushed and folded. They had never been worn, my mother said. Under that a miscellany began, a cordon, a tin canteen, several sticks of tobacco, 2 brace of very handsome pistols, a piece of bird silver, an old Spanish watch, and some other trinkets of little value and mostly of foreign make, a pair of compasses mounted with brass, and 5 or 6 curious West Indian shells. I have often wondered since why he should have carried about these shells with him in his wandering, guilty, and haunted life. In the meantime, we had found nothing of any value but the silver and the trinkets, and neither of these were in our way. Underneath there was an old boat cloak, written with a sea salt on many a harbour bar. My mother put it up with impatience, and there lay before us the last things in the chest, a bundle tied up in old clothes and looking like papers, and a canvas bag that gave forth at the touch the jingle of gold. "I'll show their rouge that I'm the honest woman," said my mother. "I'll have my dues, and not a furthering over. Hold Miss Crossley back." And she began to count over the amount of Captain's score from the sailor bags into the one that I was holding. It was a long, difficult business, for the coins were of all countries and sizes, doubloons and louis d'or and guineas, and pieces of 8, and I know that what besides are shaken together at random. The guineas, too, were about the scarcest, and it was with this only that my mother knew how to make her count. When we were about halfway through, I suddenly put my hand upon her arm, for I had heard in the silent, frosty air a sound that brought my heart into my mouth, the tapping of the blind man's street upon the frozen road. It drew nearer and nearer, while we sat holding our breath. Then it finished page 22.
Eve, 2014, May 28th. The title is Treasure Island. Start page 23. Struck sharp on the inn door, and then we could hear the handles being turned, and the bolts rattlings as the wretched beings tried to enter. And then there was a long time of silence both within and without. At last, the tappings recommenced, and to our indescribable joy and gratitude died slowly away again until it ceased to be heard. "Mother," said I, "take the walls and let's be going, for I was sure the bolted doors must have the seams suspicious, and would bring the wolves' hornets' nest about our ears. How thankful I was that I had bolted it. None could tell who had never met the terrible splint man. But my mother, frightened as she was, would not consent to take a fraction more than was due to her, and was obstinately unwilling to be content with less. It was not yet 7, she said, but a long way she knew her rights, and she would have them. And she was still arguing with me when a little low whistle sounded a good way up on the hill. There was enough, and more than enough for both of us. "I'll take what I have," she said, jumping to her feet. "And I'll take this to scare the counts," said I, picking up the oilskins packet. Next moment, we were both groping downstairs, leaving the candles by the empty chest, and the next we had opened the door and were the fools retreat. When had not been started a moment too soon, the fog was replying after dispersing. Already the moon shone of the quite clear on the high ground enough of the side, and it was only in the exact bottom of the jail and round the servant's door then and in the view still hung unbroken to conceal the first steps of our escape. For alas, Then halfway to the hamlet, where a little beyond the bottom of the hill, we must come forth into the moonlight. Nor was this all, for the sound of the several footsteps running came already to our ears, and as we looked back in their directions, a light tossing to and fro and still rapidly advancing showed that one of the newcomers carried a lantern. "My dear," said my mother suddenly, "take the money and run on. I am going to the faint." This was certainly the end for both of us, I thought. How I cursed the cautious eyes of the neighbors. How I blamed my poor mother for her hardness and chagrin, for her past foolhardiness and the present weakness. We were just at a little bridge by good furniture, and I helped her to drink as she was to the edge of the bank. We were so enough. She gave the sigh and fell on my shoulder. I do not know how I found the strength to do it at all, and I am afraid it was rudely done, but I managed to drag her down two banks and a little way down to the edge. Further, I could not move her, for the bridge was too low to let me to more than throws below it. She there we had to sit, and mother's almost entered left exposed, and both of us within earshot of the inn. Finish page 24.
Carl 2013, May 28th. Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. My curiosity, in a sense, was stronger than my fear, for I could not remain where I was, but crept back to the bank again, whence, sheltering my head behind a bush of bloom, I might command the Lord before our door. I was scarcely in position ere my enemies began to arrive, 7 or 8 of them, running hard, their pit bearing out of time along the road, and the man with the lantern some paces in front. 3 men ran together, hand in hand, and I made out, even through the mist, that the middle man of this trio was the blind beggar. The next moment his voice showed me that I was right. "Down with the door," he cried. "Ale, sir," answered 2 or 3. And a rush was made up under Admiral Benno, the mental below following, and then I could see them pause and hear speeches passed in a lower key, as if they were surprised to find the door open. But the pause was brief, for the blind man again issued his commands. His voice sounded louder and higher, as if he were afire with eagerness and rage. In, he shouted, and cursed them for their delay. 4 or 5 of them obeyed at once, 2 remaining on the road with the formidable beggar. There was a pause, then a cry of surprise, and then a voice shouting from the house, "Bill's dead," but the blind man swore at them again for their delay. "Search him, some of you, searching robbers, and the rest of you aloft, and get the chest," he cried. I could hear their feet rattling up our old stairs, so that the house must have shook with it. Promptly afterwards, fresh sounds of atmosphere arose. The window of the captain's room was thrown open with a slam and jingle of broken glass, and a man leaned out into the moonlight, head and shoulders, and addressed the blind beggar on the road below him. "Pew," he cried. "There've been people us. Some has turned the chest out alow and aloft. Is it there, Lord Pew?" "The money's there." The blind man calls the money. "Plains to pierce, I mean," he cried. "We don't see it here nohow," returned the man. "Here, you below there, is it on Bill?" cried the blind man again. And that another fellow, probably him who had remained below to search the captain's body, came to the door of the inn. "Bill's been overhauled already," said he. "Nothing left." "It's these people of the inn. It's that boy. I wish I had put his eyes out," cried the blind man. "Pew, they were here no time ago. They had the Dora bolted when I cried it, started last, and find them. Sure enough, they left their grim hill, said the fellow from the window. Scattered and find them, loud the house out. Late Pew, stalking with his stick upon the road. Then there followed a great to-do through all our old inn, heavy feet pounding to and fro, furniture thrown over, doors kicked in, until the belly laughed re-echoes, and the men came out again, one after another on the road, and declared that we were nowhere to be found. And just then the same whistle that had alarmed my mother and myself of the dead captain's money was once more clearly audible through the night, but this time twice repeated. I had thought it to be the blind man's trumpet, so to speak, summoning his clue to the assault. But I now found that it was a signal from his side towards the helmet, and from its effect upon the buccaneers, a signal to warn them of approaching danger. "There's dark again," said one. "Twice we will have to Borgie, mates. Borgie, use clock," climbed Pew. "Dark was your fool and a coward from the first. You wouldn't mind him. They must be close by. They cannot be far. You have your hands on it. Scatter and look for them, dogs." "Oh, shiver my soul," he cried. "If I had eyes." Finish page 26.